and appears to show religion being used to achieve political power. In the light of Sensei's declaration of the need for religion and politics to be kept separate, could you please explain what was essentially happening then?
Okay, so as far as the individual is concerned, like everything else in life, it's impossible to separate Buddhism from it. Let's say you as an individual discover as you practice that this practice and this philosophy, and the Gohonzon indeed, most important of all, embraces every aspect of human life, both our individual lives and our lives in a social sense. So you cannot separate any aspect of daily life from the individual who is practicing Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism. That's understandable, isn't it? Therefore, you can't separate an individual life from politics. You can't stop someone who is practicing to the Gohonzon to practice in order to gain the wisdom to understand and use politics in the best possible way. It's impossible. Indeed, it would be wrong to do so, wouldn't it? What we want is more and more people becoming active in a perceptive way, in a political sense, and basing all their actions, their thinking, their speaking, and their deeds on the Gohonzon. Then the greater will be the politics of this country. So there's a great difference, therefore, isn't there, between the religious body or organization and the individual. Of course, the religious body or organization is made up of all the individuals. But on the other hand, the religious body as such could be a political power unit, couldn't it? So that is the point that Mr. Toda and Sensei, when he was quite young, used to discuss into the early hours of the morning what was going to be the way in which the Soka Gakkai should enter or not enter the political field. And they talked, chanted and chanted. And in the end, they were absolutely clear that it is always disaster if a religious organization gets involved in politics. That's a different thing from the individual human being, isn't it? Always disaster. Because in one way or another, the politicians bring pressure to bear on that religious body. And this in turn begins to distort the teachings and distort and spoil the purity of that religious body as such. So that is why in 1964, Sensei made the first of two official public declarations that the Soka Gakkai was no longer anything to do with the Komeito Party. So the Komeito Party arose out of a number of members feeling a desire to go into politics. And Mr. Toda strongly encouraged them. They had this feeling, and he said, yes, please do. And the important thing to remember is that at that time, democracy or the democratic political system was totally new to Japan. Japan had never had a democratic system before World War II. It was a sort of mishmash, but basically it was still a feudal government, though it tried to cover that up with the trappings of something that might look a little bit like democracy. But after 1945, with the new constitution, they were actually creating a democratic constitution. So naturally, these few members decided they wanted to go into politics. Mr. Toda encouraged them, as I said. And of course, they linked together. They discussed politics in the light of the Gohonzon and their practice, just the same as doctors might or lawyers might. And gradually, they began to get into local government. They were elected into local, as individuals, elected into local government or into the national government. And so, of course, gradually their influence was spreading, and they realized they must form some sort of political party. So they were all basing their political thinking, their political words and their political deeds on the Gohonzon, these people. So they decided to form the Komeito Party, which means the Clean Government Party. And the other thing to understand is that this entirely new system of government, democratic system of government, rose literally out of the ashes in Japan. Japan was destroyed. It's difficult for us to believe now when you go to Japan and you see these glittering cities, but it was destroyed. It was chaos everywhere. Every city except Kyoto had virtually been destroyed. And therefore, like all places where chaos rules, corruption began to grow. So there was a black market, just the same as happened in West Germany after the war. In Germany as a whole, there was corruption of people who were exploiting those who were suffering, basically. You find the same thing in Northern Ireland today. There are people who are living off the rebellion. People who are making money out of it. Disgusting as it may be, one always finds that. So Mr. Todo was extremely concerned about this and frightened and worried that the democratic system in Japan would get off the ground in a distorted and incorrect way due to these corrupt pressures. And for this reason, he strongly encouraged, too, those members to chant and support the Komeito Party in the elections. He called, it was called the Clean Government Party, and he wanted it to be a stabilizing influence in the politics of Japan in the future. So, of course, it was entirely up to each individual member how they voted. I'm sure there were some who had voted for the Conservative Party, called the LDP, for generations and generations, who probably continued to vote for the LDP. But of course, there'd be other members, and if I'd been there today, it would have included me, who wanted politicians who were practicing to the Gohonzon. So, of course, they wished those people to get into power. But it was entirely an individual matter. And, of course, Komeito has grown marvelously, now the third biggest political party in Japan, and it holds the balance of power now between the conservatives and the socialists and communists. Communism is quite strong in Japan, though you don't hear much about it. So we've now reached a point where in certain political wards in some of the major cities, the number of the total electorate of voting for the Komeito Party, there are more non-members than there are members. So this is the way Komeito has grown, and of course the way in which it is influencing politics and society in Japan. But it's absolutely separate and will always remain so. No politician or official of the Komeito Party can be a leader in the Gakkai. They can't even go to discussion meetings for fear that they might be accused of using meetings in order to gain votes. So this is very clear-cut. And in fact, it's quite difficult to meet members of the Komeito Party for that reason, because they're always on other business. So that is the way things are. Has that answered that question all right? Okay. Good. Now we can leave Buddhism and politics and go on to Buddhism and education. So this whole part of the book is about two things: education and learning. You might think the two are the same, but they're not. Education and learning are two different things. So first of all, let's take education. If you look up the Oxford Dictionary, it says education, the word education means systematic instruction, schooling, or, interestingly, in brackets for us as Buddhists, training in preparation for life. I was quite surprised to find that in the Oxford Dictionary. Or for some particular task, scholastic instruction, or bringing up. And interestingly enough, when you come to the verb to educate, it's a little bit narrower. It hasn't got that reference to training in life. To educate means to train, discipline, so as to develop some special aptitude, taste, or disposition. So I was pleased to find in the Oxford Dictionary that education meant, amongst other things, schooling or training in preparation for life. Because this is a crucially important view of education, of course, from the Buddhist point of view. So education, as those definitions imply, involve a teacher or master. So the greatest example that we know, of course, of education and the relationship between the teacher and the pupil, it would be Mr. Toda and his master, Mr. Makiguchi, and Sensei and his master, Mr. Toda. So really, Mr. Toda educated Sensei. He took responsibility for his education. Learning is something different, and yet in a way similar. Learning is self-motivated. It's something that you decide yourself. Though, of course, you may be encouraged by others. So you can learn through reading books off your own bat, through observing other people's lives, through experiences of life, and so on. So, but it is different from education. So, for example, my mind went to my old mother, who in all the 94 years of her life never got further than Paris, so far as trips abroad was concerned. And that was, I know, was for one weekend. That was the furthest she ever went. But she spent 1 hour every day reading books. And as small children, we had to keep quiet during that period and let her read. And she read travel books, biographies, books about other countries, good books, valuable books. And she was an incredibly knowledgeable person. I heard her often holding her own amongst a group of 3 or 4 men, who, including my father, who could argue the head off a donkey, and she'd hold her own, though she had no knowledge of the world as such. And remember, in those days, there was no telly, nothing like that. I mean, there was Charlie Chaplin in the Gold Rush, but that wasn't much of an education. So it really, it came from that, her decision. She must have made a decision that she would, although, of course, she'd been to school and so on, had a formal education. But most women in those days were still very narrow, had very little view of the world. But she definitely must have decided to do it, probably because she felt that she had to keep pace with my brother and I in the future, and she wanted to help us to understand the world and life. Anyway, that's the way she did it. So that was learning. Nichiren Daishonin was very strict about this point, because he said that for human beings to have seeking minds, which is what you have to have, isn't it, to learn, off your own bat is crucially important to human beings' happiness and, of course, to the state of the world. And he didn't mince words. He said that people without seeking minds were no better than animals. And that's true, because the essential difference between the human being and other forms of life are that the human being has free will and the built-in ability to learn and to seek knowledge and experience. That's why he said human beings who don't learn, who don't have seeking minds, are no better than animals. It's the essential difference between a human being and an animal is that the human being can have a seeking mind. Do you agree? When you think about it, it's right, isn't it? Now, I was explaining last time, I think, that the ingredients of wisdom are, of course, the Buddha wisdom. So far as Buddhism is concerned, the Buddha wisdom, the universal wisdom lying in the depths of our lives. But also it has to have those two other ingredients of knowledge and experience. If your Buddha's wisdom, which is a universal wisdom, is there, but you don't feed into it knowledge and experience, when you chant Daimoku to bring it out, it's not going to be very helpful to you, is it? It's not going to relate to your local circumstances as a human being. So you have to feed in your experiences and your knowledge as much as you can. Then it mixes together and comes out in the way which is perfectly suited to your own life and circumstances. So again, that emphasizes the importance of learning, doesn't it? Knowledge and experience is an essential ingredient of wisdom. So we can move on to from there to say to ourselves, then what is a really good or great teacher? And the answer is clear, isn't it? The truly great teacher, who, mind you, remember, is an educator, someone in the educational system, but the truly great teacher is the one who encourages the pupil to develop a desire for learning. So, of course, the teacher has to educate in maths or Latin or English or geography or whatever. That is the specific task of the teacher. But much more important, actually, than that, and much deeper and more profound, the task of the great teacher should be to bring out this desire to learn more. In other words, when the pupil leaves school, they have a desire in them to go on learning. Makes sense, doesn't it? And I know in our education group, how many members of the education group here? Can you hold up your hands? Anybody? Only one? One absent, I see. Okay. Anyway, I know that our education group are so aware of this. It's a great thing. Our education group, we were the first organization in the whole world, surprisingly enough, to form an education group. I asked Robert today, 1978. And many meetings and seminars they've held, and this is their great aim, to find ways to follow this guidance, to be able to develop this hunger, if you like, or desire for learning in their pupils. And many of their experiences are very great to listen to in the way they've succeeded in doing this, even in the chaotic classrooms of today. And this, of course, was Mr. Makiguchi's great principle of education. And Mr. Makiguchi ran a primary school in a country area in Japan. And it was there that he put all his theories to the test. So he said, half a day at school or in the schoolroom is enough. Plenty. The rest of the day should be spent in what one might call field work. In other words, he and all his other teachers, when they were educating in a particular subject, say it was literature or grammar or mathematics, they would really find ways to relate that to what was going on in that local community, in that village. Every subject they taught, somehow they tried to make it clear how that particular subject related to the local community and its life, its sufferings, its good points, and so on. So then they would go out in the afternoon and really observe the way that particular village worked. What made it tick? Who did this and that? Who brought the food? Where did it come from? What about the fertilizer? Who mended the roads? What about the sewage? Every aspect of that community life was covered in the primary school, right at the real beginning, isn't it, of a child's education. So his theory, which of course he proved, was that if you can get someone to really take an interest in how their community worked, their village or whatever it might be, then once they've mastered that, they'll want to expand further. They'll want to know how the nearest city functions or how the prefecture is functioning in terms of Japan. And that will lead to wanting to understand Japan itself and how that works and what Japan's place is in the world as a whole. So in other words, he was sowing the seeds of learning, wasn't he, in these young children, right at their most impressionable age in primary school. Just fantastic, I think. I wish I'd been to his primary school. So in that way, you see, he wanted education to be like a launching pad for a whole lifetime of learning. And Mr. Toda continued that system, really, with Sensei. So as you know, if you read The Human Revolution, he really taught Sensei everything. Especially, he made him read great works, books that were really valuable. So I don't know whether any of you have had a mentor. Mr. Toda was Sensei's mentor. I personally was very fortunate in life because I've had 3 mentors. And when I was preparing this lecture, I was surprised to discover my first mentor was from the age of 12 to 15. And my second mentor was exactly 10 years later, from the age of 22 to 25. And then there was a long gap when I was really in the wilderness until I met Sensei and became his disciple in 1952, 30 years later. But my first mentor was my history master at school. He was an incredible man. Name was Mr. Gayford, but he really was a wonderful human being. There was no other reason for him being so valuable to me except that he was an incredible, wonderful, warm human being, and he wanted us all to be great. That was his great desire. It simply oozed out of him, bringing out the best in each one of us. He was a history master. He made me love history because of the way he taught and the way he sort of could relate it to me as if he was talking to me, though there was a class of whatever it was, 25 or 30. So he was my first great mentor because he expanded my life. He definitely triggered off the desire to learn more in me. And, of course, history became my favorite subject because of this man. And I began to understand through history and through his promptings And I think he was a follower of Toynbee, though I can never remember him actually saying that at the time. I think he must have been, because he pointed out it was essential. If you understood history, you could understand why things were like they were today. And then my second mentor was a brigadier, if you can believe it. He was a great man. So I was with him, stuck in the jungle in Burma. And often, though we were fighting a war, often there were times when there was not much going on, especially when the monsoons were on and it was raining so hard that it was very difficult to move, even on foot. And I just got on with this man, and he seemed to believe in me, I suppose, in some way. So we used to talk about every subject under the sun. During those times, in of all places, the jungles of Burma. Really strange, isn't it? But he taught me so much. But the most important thing he taught me was caring for others, believe it or not. That was what he taught me. Caring for others. So I tell you, the British Army is great. I still would say that, although I'm a Buddhist, totally against war, the British Army is great because there is a tradition of caring for each other. There is a strong tradition in the British Army of caring for every single soldier's life. And this was ingrained in him, and he taught it to me. So many other things, human things, he was a very humane person. Other things like initiative, leadership. Really, he was a wonderful old man. I used to think he was incredibly old at that time, by the way. He was probably 10 years younger than I am now. But he was great. And then 30 years more, I swam around in the mud and slush of ordinary life, gaining all sorts of experiences, many of them bad, some of them horrendous, some of them great, until finally, in 1952, I became Sensei's disciple and had a mentor once again. So Sensei has taught me everything about life, not by, as I've often told you, not by just actually personally talking to me, but by my reading his guidance and putting it into action, by my remembering him in my daimoku, which helps me to live in rhythm with him, and my belief in him as a truly wise person who can lead this great movement for Kosen Rufu. And my desire, therefore, that I can give him as little trouble as possible and that I can anticipate all his wishes and not cause him worry. So that's been my life. But having a mentor is a great thing. So I can't tell you how lucky you all are. You who are so young and found a master of life at such a young age. So, of course, you get all sorts of doubts at the beginning. You hammer away at those. But you have an incredible master of life. And the more you go on, the more you'll realize that. And such a thing is really priceless. So Toynbee and Ikeda both agree, therefore, that education, as we've said, should lead people to search for the meaning of life and also to discover the right way to live. That is what education should all be about. So behind teaching maths or Latin, literature, whatever, the teacher should, deep in her or his life, desire to achieve that with every pupil. Then our education system would be great. Of course, there are other reforms necessary. Our education system has got lost like education system has in many other countries in the world. Technological revolution has taken over, and the educational system has not kept pace with this. It's become swamped by it, or perhaps mesmerized by it. Mesmerized in the sense that all people could think about was specialization. Because of the technological revolution, being so complicated, being so extensive and wise, the accent came down on specialization. So we have today a system which breeds specialists, people with a very narrow point of view, following a very narrow channel in life, not having the slightest idea, really, what the rest of the world is about, blundering on, perhaps sometimes brilliantly, but with no relationship with anything else around it. It's interesting in that respect that the whole aim of CHEC, the Commonwealth Human Ecology Council, is to overcome this problem. The work of CHEC is to make specialists in charge of various aspects of planning and development get together with the other specialists, and not only with the other specialists, but also with the people involved of all ages. In other words, everyone who is involved with that development, whatever it may be. That is their aim, and they've been very successful in a number of cases. So this is where everything has got lost. And maybe it could be where we could have a break. Would that be a good idea? I think it'd be a good point to do it. All right. Okay. Okay, everybody. So let's continue. We've got now into the problem of specialization. And so we'll give Alinka something to do. If you could read Alinka, what we marked A. Okay? This is on page 61, 62. Bottom of page 61, it begins.
In the age of technological civilization, education in the right way to live needs to be supplemented by vocational training in special branches of knowledge and kinds of skill. But before entering his profession, everyone who has received professional training ought to take the Hippocratic Oath that is prescribed for entrance into the medical profession. Every entrant into any profession ought to pledge himself to use his special knowledge and skill for serving his fellow human beings and not for exploiting them. He should give his obligation of service priority over his incidental need to make a living for himself and for his family. Maximum service, not maximum profit, is the objective to which he should dedicate himself. Ikeda, you are quite right. By devoting itself to a utilitarianism that overemphasizes intellectual knowledge and technological skills, education in modern society has had two major bad consequences. First, by making learning a tool of politics and economics, it has robbed learning of its inherent dignity and independence. Second, people engaged in learning and education become the slaves of intellectual knowledge and technological skill, which are the only aspects of learning prized today. As an outcome of this trend, respect for humanity declines. In short, today, people are compelled to serve intellectual knowledge and technological skill, which are in turn controlled by politics and economics.
No truer words were ever said. Though they were written, 12 years ago, they're just as applicable, even more so, I think, today. The other staggering thing, Nathalie, is it true that as a doctor you don't take the Hippocratic Oath anymore? That's right, because it doesn't exist anymore. Any other doctors here? Yes? Have you ever heard of it? Incredible, isn't it? I couldn't believe it the other day. I went to wish Christopher Bowie good luck because he was becoming a qualified doctor and graduating. And I happened to mention the Hippocratic Oath. And he said, it doesn't exist. It was obliterated 8 years ago, I think it was, he told me. So the Hippocratic Oath was central the doctors' lives. It was an oath which they took, which was to put service to humanity above their own selfish desires. And many, many great doctors lived by it. There's no doubt about that. Probably many of you have come across in your lives one great doctor who was an incredible person and who devoted himself in the true spirit of the Bodhisattva to serving others. And of course he got his reward in terms of satisfaction and joy. Anyway, this arose out of the Hippocratic Oath. When a doctor was training, they knew they were going to have to take that oath. And it was solemnly taken and central to the whole medical profession. And here I go to this graduation ceremony and discover that without a word to anybody, it's disappeared. I think that it existed in most European countries. Whether it's disappeared from all European countries or not, I don't know. I'm going to try and find out more about it. But the fact is that it's disappeared from Britain. Don't you think that's a terrible thing? Isn't that an unbelievable sign of the deterioration of the human being's view of his purpose in life? It seems to me an incredible cowardice. And I suppose it's because people haven't got, the rock of a great philosophy on which to base their lives. Yes. Well, that is what Dr. Toynbee is saying, but actually it was only applicable to doctors. But anyway, it's gone. So I don't know what standards the medical profession works to now. But I guess, like everything else, that dedication has gone, you see. It was devotion and dedication. Of course, there's bound to be doctors who haven't taken the Hippocratic Oath, young doctors who still have that dedication. But I guess, it won't be so widespread as it was when every doctor knew that in the end he was going to have to take that oath. And that every patient he ever treated knew that he'd taken it. It's gone. So Dr. Toynbee is suggesting it should be taken by teachers as well. But sadly, everything has gone the opposite way, and even the doctors aren't doing it anymore. It's a shock to me. So looking at education from the point of view of teachers, parents, and ourselves, first of all, as teachers, and now I'm talking about people who are practicing Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism. Obviously, the teacher who is practicing Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism really is chanting, as we've already discovered, to bring out that seeking mind in every one of his pupils, trying to lay the foundations in their lives so that they can become really great, valuable citizens and human beings. So far as parents are concerned, there are great restrictions. If you want your child, you're concerned about the school your child should go to, you're restricted by the system at the moment in all sorts of different ways. This is a terrible thing. As a mother or a father who intimately know that child, you should have a say in what sort of school they should attend. You could send two brothers to the same school. For one of them, it may be admirable. For the other, it may not be, because they're two different human beings, aren't they? And no one knows that more closely than the caring parent. Of course, it's true that there are some parents who don't care. But that shouldn't be the basis for the educational system. So we want a system that allows people to choose. In other words, someone can go to the Gohonzon and say, which of these various alternatives, I must have the wisdom to know which is best for so-and-so. whatever the name of the child is. That's the parent's task with the Gohonzon. So who's going to bring about that sort of reform? That's the interesting point. I mean, it's just one of many reforms that are necessary in the education system. Who's going to do it? Who's involved in the education system? Here, hands up. As a teacher, as a teacher, a nursery nurse, student. Okay. Okay, who's going to do it? Who's going to bring about this reform? And many other reforms. But that is Kosen Rufu. That's why I'm bringing this subject up. Every one of you enters a different field of society in terms of your work. Not only you, not only the other members of the New Century Group, every member of NSU. Who is going to be the first politician, as I said last time? Who is going to be the person who sows the seeds of this particular small reform? We feel it's a small reform in a whole mass of reforms that are necessary. But without a doubt, NSUK, as its numbers expand, will play an increasingly important part in bringing about these sorts of reforms. It's seed sowing, isn't it? Yes. Sorry?
Well, I don't know, very good chance that the I was also told here that even those who were going to take choice.
Sorry, you're linking the election with?
Said that I just think choice.
Well, the point is you're looking at the surface only. So, of course, the surface is important, but Buddhists who chant to the Gohonzon, we have to look deeper than the surface. We know, all of us, that these sort of reforms can't be carried out overnight. But what we also know is that the first step has to be taken. The seeds have to be sown. So if you are in, maybe no one here is, please don't worry about that. But if, one of you happens to find yourself in a department of government or of local government involved in educational reform, you will definitely sow seeds. Or if you like to put it another way, drop pebbles in the pond, the ripples of which will go outwards and outwards and affect many things and many people. You will view things from a different dimension because you're practicing to the Gohonzon. When you get involved in meetings or just informal get-togethers over a cup of coffee, the way you express things will have a different slant to it. Without almost realizing it. So Sensei said recently in Paris, you really, to the French members, I want you to be, all of you, to be like lighthouses, lighting the way of happiness and progress, attracting people because your views have some innate good sense, come from a different viewpoint, which is somehow fresh and new. That is the viewpoint of the wisdom of your Buddha state, isn't it? In truth. But what I'm trying to make clear to you is that each of you in your own particular area of life, each of you in your own particular sphere of action, will bring about incredible change in the future, almost without realizing. Because The words you say, the actions you take, what you think is based on the wisdom of your Buddha state. This is Kosen Rufu. This is the way Kosen Rufu works. So as I said, I think last time, we may come together like we are now to study something or discuss something, but after that we all go off in countless different directions, don't we? Each of us in different fields. We haven't got time to go around the room, but this room contains people in an incredible number of different fields of work and action. If you take NSUK as a whole, those fields are multiplied, in a number of times. That is Kosen Rufu. We go into our own particular sphere of action. And like a lighthouse, because of the work of the Buddhist state in us, because of the Gohonzon's working in us, we can bring about